Hey friends, Pastor Bill Walden here with Build Up the Church. Hope you're doing super. This is a devotional word for June 19th, 2024. It's out of the book of Acts chapter 5. In the book of Acts chapter 5, we see the apostles, starting first with Peter and John and then including all of them, being arrested multiple times and interrogated and warned by the religious rulers of Jerusalem, primarily the Sadducees and those of the high priest's household. And they are telling them to not talk about Jesus anymore. And they are threatening them. And these are the guys, we remember, that arranged for Jesus to be crucified and had put pressure on Pontius Pilate. So we pick up the story here in verse 26. Then the captain went with the officers and brought them without violence, for they feared the people, lest they should be stoned. So the religious rulers went to have the apostles arrested, but they did it calmly and not roughing them up or anything like that, lest the public turn against them, because the public greatly revered them and respected them. Verse 27, and when they had brought them, they set them before the council, and the high priest asked them, saying, did we not strictly command you to not teach in this name? And look, you have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine and intend to bring this man's blood on us. What a wonderful indictment and actually compliment against the apostles, that they had basically turned Jerusalem upside down with the doctrine of Jesus Christ. But Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than men. And then he goes on to explain a lot about the guilt of the religious rulers of Israel. We ought to obey God rather than men. The Apostle Paul tells us that our citizenship is in heaven. Peter tells us that we are sojourners and pilgrims here on the earth. Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am you may also be. And so the Christian understands that we are sojourners here, we are pilgrims. In one way, all people are sojourners here because we don't live forever on earth. We live forever somewhere, either in the presence of God or away from the presence of God. But for the Christian, we are reminded that Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. And so our first allegiance is not to this world that we live in and the governments that we live under, but our first and highest allegiance is to Jesus Christ and his kingdom. We want to be good citizens. We want to be model citizens. We want to contribute more than anyone, not to outdo them for our sakes, but just to be good citizens. And we should not let up in being good citizens in the country that we live in the cities, in the regions that we live in. And yet there will come a time, inevitably, where the government of man conflicts with the government of God, and it is only at that point that we say we ought to obey God rather than men. That's not to be done capriciously. That's not to be done flippantly. That's not to be done because we have a burr in our saddle, we have a bee in our bonnet, we have a pebble in our shoe regarding local governments, and we don't like local leaders and that kind of thing. We don't like the high taxes. We don't like the price of gas and the interest rates on buying a house and those kinds of things. There's a lot that we don't like that we should submit to anyway. But when the kingdoms of man come in conflict with the kingdom of God, we must stop there. That's where we draw the line. And we obey God rather than man. Each one of us needs to do that by working out our own salvation with fear and trembling, as the apostle says in the book of Philippians, as the apostle Paul says in the book of Philippians. And so this isn't something that we do capriciously. This isn't something that we do lightheartedly. This isn't something we do without prayer. This isn't something we do to just suit that which we like. One of the great examples, I think, in recent years was in 2020 when COVID came and visited planet Earth. In the United States of America, and all over the world really, but in the United States of America, the government in most parts of our country were trying to close down church services because they said it was a concentrated gathering of people, and they would further infect one another and spread the disease and that kind of thing. And so there were laws saying that Christians couldn't meet for church. And at that point, that's one instance where I said, well, I'm going to disobey this law. And because God says that we ought to be meeting regularly, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, not forsaking the meeting of the saints together. I did that prayerfully. I did that cautiously. I didn't advertise it because I didn't want to try to pick a fight with the government. But where I was pastoring at the time, we just kept meeting. And there were some other extenuating circumstances that did make it a little easier for us than for other churches to do that. But we did keep meeting, and I felt good about it. And I thought the government does not have the right to take away our worship of God and our gathering together in the faith. And so that was a time for me when I said, I'm going to obey God rather than man. And so each one of us has to work these things out on our own. And we need to do so in such a way that when we go stand before Jesus, we hear him say, regarding such things as COVID or other things, well done, good and faithful servant. So for you, use your commitment to God, not for your own advantage, but for the advantage and the furthering of the kingdom of God. If we don't obey man, it's only because we have a higher calling. We have the calling of the kingdom of God. And so that is where our allegiance lies. So some things to think about. We want to be good citizens, but there are times when we have to draw a line in the sand and we say, that's as far as it goes. I'm reminded of one pastor in the United States that said they were going to keep meeting during COVID. And he said he didn't consider it an act of civil disobedience. He considered it an act of higher obedience. And I think that encapsulates and captures the sentiment of this idea perfectly. It's not that I'm rebelling against the government. It's that I have a higher calling. I have a higher call to obedience unto the Lord. So some things for you to think about. God bless you. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.